One man who perhaps should have got that job joins me now. Former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett's written about the issue of Australia today in the Herald Sun. He said, what a sad case we are becoming when leaders of high-profile organisations decide not to recognise and salute Australia Day. Jeff Kennett joins me now. Great to talk to you again.
Thank you, Steve.
No, didn't put your hand up for the ABC chairman's job?
No, I think the way the ABC has been conducting itself over the last couple of years, it calls into question again just what it's there for. It really is a worry. I'm not saying we shouldn't have the ABC. I just hope Mr Williams can bring a real sense of independence to it, because right now it ain't independent.
I read your column today, and in fact, I've got a confession to make. I'm actually going to write about the same thing on the weekend, but I've got a confession to make here. I've written that I've basically given up on Australia Day. I reckon it's just too hard, all too hard.
Well, I disagree with that, and I think something that's worth fighting for should be fought for, and I think it's time, Steve, the empire fought back. I have become so tired of the complacency of so many Australians who just take for granted where we are and the wokishness that exists in this society. So can you imagine how many communities around the world on their National Day are waking up to conflicts, to wars, to famine, to a whole range of issues? We're waking up on Friday to a free country, a country where people can express their views, where we are a wonderfully dignified, diverse community. We have the best in the world. We get no leadership from the Prime Minister on this. We get no leadership from the captain of the cricket team. We get Australian tennis, which is the greatest sporting event in Australia in terms of its overseas publicity. And when they're in trouble, we give them $60 million to get them out of a hole. Australia supports Tennis Open. The Victorian government supports them, I support them, and they don't give a thing back. And yet at the Australian Open on Australia Day in the past, we've had the most wonderful celebrations of Australian flags on the centre court. I think they've simply lost the courage to lead, and I'm sick of it.
If you were still Premier, would you have called in the boss of Tennis Australia, Craig Tiley, and said, listen, mate, we wrote a cheque for $60 million for you to get you out of a hole post-COVID. You will celebrate Australia Day, and I want to hear from you how you're going to do it.
I think you've interpreted what I would have done accurately, and it probably would have been said in less kind words. I mean, I'm sick of it. Why do we keep putting ourselves down as a country when we've got so much to offer? Why do we keep dividing ourselves when we've got so much to celebrate? I all supported same-sex marriage, and I don't care about a person's gender or how they live their lives. But we've got something here in this country that most people around the world would give their right and left arm to have. And there are people in this country who will not accept and support that. Well, as I said, it's time the empire fought back. And I'm sure between now and Australia Day next year, if the Prime Minister does not support the country he leads openly and with vigour, if he wants to change the date, do it, but do it now so we don't have to go through this every year. I'm all for the 26th, but if that isn't acceptable, find a date that is, so that next year we can all celebrate Australia Day as citizens, regardless of where we've come from, when we've come, our colour, our gender and our language.
I know you're a great champion of free speech and people can protest and say whatever they like within reason, but where did we get to the point where the hard, shouty left have cowed all the rest of us into basically silence? I will guarantee you, and I know you'd agree with me on this, there would be players in that Australian cricket team who would support Australia Day on the 26th, but they're probably too frightened to come out and say it for the reaction they might get back at them.
Yes, you're probably right. I remember a couple of years ago when Pat Cummins became leader of our test team, he went through a period of intense criticism and questioning about whether he had the character to lead. And he's proved that he has. But he wears the baggy green. He leads the Australian cricket team here and around the world. What? He's earning a fortune. For goodness sake, where does this responsibility lie? In continuing to promote the country and the sport that's given him and his family the opportunities they have today. It's time the silent majority in this public said enough is enough. And as I say, I think the leadership's got to come from the top. If the Prime Minister doesn't believe in Australia Day, he ought to stand down. And he ought to stand down, secondly, for what he's potentially going to do tonight, and that is throw out the tax cuts that have been legislated for a number of years and he went to the polls on. People want leadership. We've had a gutful of these people trying to please every minority group every day of the week.
Always great to catch up with you, Jeff Kennett. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for dropping in, Steve.